Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another episode of Crown Jewels. I am your host, PLD, on the PLD Projects Network. And we've done it, folks. We made it past through two albums, from Queen's 1973 debut and through 1974's Queen 2 on to 1974's Sheer Heart Attack. Yes, the second album in the released in the year by the band. A lot of people think this is one of their best albums of all time, and I can't really argue with that, to be honest with you. I also tend to agree with that. The band decided to venture away from the second album's fantasy realm, the epic, sprawling nature of some of their tracks, and decided to concentrate on getting something that they could put on the radio, put on FM radio, get them more exposure. So you're going to find a lot more short songs, but they haven't lost any of their edge. They haven't lost any of their depth. It's really the same musical skill, just in a more compact form, so we can get some radio airplay, and it did work. It did work for them. The album was released in November of 1974 and climbed all the way to number 2 on the UK chart, while making it to number 12 on the US chart. The band did have some unexpected time off after Brian May had some health issues on the Queen 2 tour, which gave them the impetus to go right back into the studio and keep the momentum going. In fact, it was at one point where Brian was kind of nervous that the band might try to replace him, even though the band had no intentions of doing that. But the band did do a lot of stuff without Brian at first. Then Brian kind of had to come back into the end and add a lot of more guitar to it and rearrange a few things here and there. It was definitely an inspired time for the band. They came up with some great rock tracks, some great pop tracks, just some great musical tracks. The first one we're going to delve into here is the very first track on the album, a song called Brighton Rock. Now, if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard me mention this song a few times because this is the song that it's all kind of led up to as far as Brian goes. This is the song that houses his famous guitar solo he'd been working on since his days in Smile, back when they did Blag, when they did the live versions of Son and Daughter. This is where it is. Basically, this song has it's more instrumental than not. There's a couple of vocal parts in the beginning, some vocal parts at the end, but the majority of the song is really this long rock solo that Brian did, and he really expanded on it from here throughout the rest of his career. In fact, when I'm talking about doing live versions of this song, it's kind of interesting to notate where the live song actually begins and when the guitar solo part ends. And what I mean is they did a live tracks on like Hammersmith in 1975, so we'll get to Live Killers album, of course. Now they had their famous Live at Wembley disc from 1986, so they actually even call it the Brighton Rock solo, which in some way makes sense. It still is inspired by the original track, but really, is it really called Brighton Rock anymore? In the same tour, the Hungarian Rhapsody album came out, they just called it the guitar solo, which is what it is. But even to this day, with Queen Paul Rodgers, the Queen and Adam Lambert, he still does his guitar solo, and it all still is somewhat based on the Brighton Rock. It just kind of expanded out to include a lot more pieces here and there as well. So as far as this episode goes, and for picking the crown jewel, we're only going to be looking into actual Brighton Rock, and the demo and the live versions that do include the vocals in it as well. That's what we're going to talk about. Not going to get into any other guitar solos in the future, which is just Brian's guitar piece. And I think that goes against the very spirit of what we are trying to do, if that makes sense. If you disagree, I'm sorry, what can you do? Let's move on now and talk about just Brighton Rock itself. Of course, written by Brian May, as it is housing the guitar track. Got Freddie on lead vocals and backing vocals, Brian on guitars and backing vocals, John playing bass, and Roger doing drums and backing vocals. And before we get into it, of course, a little bit of notes and quotes. There are some early titles of this track, the demo, which we actually had to listen to one of the demos. Early titles included the following: Brighton Fuck, Happy Little Fuck, Happy Little Day, Blackpool Rock, Bognor Ballad, Southend Sea Scout, Skiffle Rock, and Herne Bay. And of course, the full live version was played through about 1979. Sometimes it would come back with an ending out of the guitar solo, lasted until 1985. And of course, again, technically speaking, Brian solos all the way through today, if you want to count that. But just the full versions ended in 1979 with a snippet of the Brighton Rock ending in 1985. But let's move on to a quote from Brian from 1983 Radio 1 interview. He said, "I'd gotten away from Hendrix quite a bit by that time, and I'd like to think that was more sort of developing my style, really, particularly the solo bit in the middle, which I've been doing on the Motley Hoople tour and sort of gradually expanded. It's gotten more and more ever since. Although I keep trying to throw it out, it keeps creeping back in, rather. That involves a repeat device actually using it in time, which I don't think had been done before up to that time. It's a very nice device to work with because you can build up harmonies or cross rhythms, and it's not a multiple repeat like Hendrix used or even the Shadows used, which is fairly indiscriminate. Sort of makes a nice noise, but this is a single repeat, which comes back, and sometimes I'll add a second one too, so you can actually plan or else experiment and do a sort of fugue type effect. So that was at the very beginning of Brighton Rock and became more developed after that. So what do we have? We have the album version to listen to. We have the unreleased early version, which is also known as Brighton Fuck. Unfortunately, is a convention demo. What I mean by that is that Greg Brooks, the official archivist, played it at a Queen convention. His voice is saying property of Queen Productions over the top, and a fan basically tape recorded it and snuck it out for us to hear. So it's not great quality, but it is interesting to hear nonetheless. We did have some unreleased and unheard versions I want to throw out there rumor-wise. We can't really listen to them because we don't know if they really truly exist. But apparently several early versions of the track originate from the Queen 2 sessions. Previously mentioned Brighton Fuck might come from those sessions, to be honest with you. That is not something we know for sure, just something that was thrown out there for that. And officially live release versions we're going to listen to will be Hammersmith 1975, as well as the version from the band's first officially released live album, Live Killers. But first off, let's go listen to the original studio version. Now, as you know, if you've been here before, this is a time where you're going to pause my podcast, look at the descriptions. You'll find YouTube links for all the versions we're going to listen to. So pause, go listen to it, then come back and we will talk about the album version, and then go on and listen to all the rest of the versions as well. Woo! Hot Mama! What a rock and roll track that is, huh? Well, the beginning has some carnival effects that the band didn't actually record. They were a sample of some carnival tracks taken from some sound effects vinyl LP back in the 70s. We do, if you listen carefully though, you do hear the whistling sounds of someone whistling I Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside from Seven Seas of Rye. Kind of a play on when they were going to end Queen 1 with Seven Seas of Rye and begin Queen 2 with Seven Seas of Rye. That didn't obviously work out, so they kind of switched it up and sort of brought Seven Seas of Rye into the Brighton Rock as the opening for Sheer Heart Attack. We have a raucous beginning right from the get-go. Brian is just, it sounds filthy, and that drum and bass kick in with Freddie's high falsetto vocals. The band is right from the get-go saying they are here, they are in your face, they are rocking. They're telling the story of two young lovers, which is why Freddie has the high falsetto vocals at first. He sings both the female part and the male part as they tell the story of these two young lovers. But it's kind of cool. It starts out with high falsetto vocals, and the second verse comes in. He sings this lower voice register. Brian adds some great orchestrated parts there as we go up until this great Rock of Ages moment where everybody comes in with a big harmony, big power chords. And there we are for the first 2 minutes of the song. At that point, the breakdown starts down, actually about 1:45, it starts breaking down into the instrumental section. Great work by Brian, filthy guitar runs in this one, but Roger and John are really hammering down that bass section, so it really gives Brian a very sound-worthy bed to lay his guitars upon. Goes through about 3.5 minutes into it at that point. Then they start the run. Brian includes the most famous repeat sound effects he was talking about, where he's layering his version. He's playing one part, then he repeats it and harmonizes on top of that, harmonizing on top of that, getting as much as he can do. He's counterplaying with each other. It's some of Brian's best work as far as what he does throughout the rest of his career. He adds a lot of this, not even just in Brighton Rock, not even just in his solo. He adds that kind of repeat effect. He likes playing with that all the time. It's really kind of cool. Of course, at the end, it comes back in strong with a big ending burn into some vocals at the end to end out the track, saying goodbye, Freddie, with a great vocal track there. Has really great rock ending, which is in and of itself a little piece of work. I almost wish there was a song based on that, just really fast rhythm, fast playing, big climactic finale. I love it again. Once again, I really do love it. And next up, we got the convention demo, the earlier version, also known as Brighton Fuck. We'll listen to this, but just a note, I'm not going to be rating this or ranking this alongside the studio version and the live versions to be an actual crown jewel. It's just for interest's sake alone. The quality is never good enough to rank on a playlist, but like I said, I do think it's interesting enough to listen to at least once. So let's do that, and we'll talk about that briefly before we move on to the live versions we have.
Property of Queen Productions.
Well, there you have it, folks. That is the property of Queen Productions version, Brighton Rock. also known as Brighton Fuck. Very little differences, really. Obviously, it's an earlier version. The lyrics aren't quite done yet. Freddie's does a lot of high falsetto-y oohs and ahs and stuff, and kind of just throws in some daddy-das when there's lyrics aren't present, and then go back from the female voice to the male voice. It's all kind of obviously in process. The instrumental version is pretty similar to the final version. Obviously, it's a little bit different here and there. Brian has definitely a different solo, a little bit of a different solo, though. It's hard to fix out what is really truly different, though, because of the quality of the song, or the quality of the sound recording, I should say. But again, it's interesting to listen to once or twice, right? But again, not going to rank it. We're not going to put it up against the higher quality releases. We're going to play alongside the studio version and put into the final rankings of which is the crown jewel. So let's get into those. Let's get into the really good sound quality ones. First off, we're going to listen to a live version that was taken from Hammersmith 1975. If you notice in the description, I put 3 links to that because it was separated into the Brighton Rock, the guitar solo, and then the son and daughter ending, which is actually kind of a different song, but I didn't want to leave you hanging. It's kind of like the ending of the whole piece de resistance, of course. And if I was going to use this version, I'd probably want to put the ending of son and daughter on anyway, just because it finishes out the track and it's not an abrupt ending. But let's listen to it now. Hammersmith 1975.
And this number is entitled Brighton Rock.
Well, there you have the live at the Hammersmith from 1975. It's fairly similar to the studio version at first, at least instrumentally. You do have Freddie singing all of it. Of course, it's lower register. He tends not to sing as many high falsetto-y notes in concert. Roder does provide the backing vocals, the higher vocals rather, in the background. Ends up becoming more of a harmony between the two rather than a back and forth. Roder wasn't taking the female part and Freddie taking the male part. They all just decided to sing most of it just together. Now, obviously, instrumentally, they have to play around a little bit for lack of the studio trickery, but the band is definitely on fire, no doubts. Brian is definitely leading the charge with this one. Some filthy runs. Does have some moments where it gets a little spacier, a little more slowed down, a little more experimental. Of course, it's different because, like I said before, the band had concentrated on tightening things up for the studio. The album version was supposed to be a little more compact. In the live setting, they can kind of do whatever they want, and Brian definitely does. Especially when he gets into the repeating part of the section. He starts playing like touches of Three Blind Mice and things of that nature. He plays around a lot more with the repeater in concert than he ever really did in the studio, which makes a lot of sense. Ultimately, though, it does end, like I said, it does, of course, end with the reprise, if you will, of Son and Daughter. Basically a nod to how they used to do the song before. It used to be Son and Daughter with the guitar solo. Now it's Brighton Rock with the guitar solo. But instead of eliminating Son and Daughter from the playlist at this point, for the set list rather, they would play the snippet of it at the end of Brighton Rock to give a little nod back. But that's it for 1975. Let's move forward a few years to the 1979 version from Live Killers, the very first live album released by the band officially. And of course, Live Killers is a very interesting conversation to have. The band didn't just pick one gig from the Live Killers tour to release. It also didn't take just songs from different gigs throughout the tours like a lot of bands would do. Instead, they really, I don't know whose idea it was, but they would mix and match different gigs and even individual tracks. Where you see, for example, Brighton Rock has at least 3 different concerts in one track. Like 13 seconds to 31 seconds is from Paris of February 28th of 1979. 5:56 to 6:58 is from Paris, March 1st of 1979. 11:02 to 11:27 is from Frankfurt, February 2nd of 1979. How do I know this? From my friend Bob Wegner, has a great website called queenlive.ca, and he did a wonderful Live Killers analysis on trying to figure out where the different gems come from. The rest of the song, from 0 minutes to 13 minutes, 31 seconds to 2:36, etc., we don't know exactly where they came from. Some are from the 1979 Live Killers tour. But it's an interesting idea. It's weird sometimes. I will say it's interesting that you don't really notice it unless you are a deep Queen fan who have listened to all the bootlegs and know exactly from which concerts these things come from. My hat's off to Bob. I never had the patience to do something like that. But let's listen to this version now, even though you might not be able to tell the difference. It probably sounds to you like all from one concert. It does to me. That's all that matters, I guess. So I guess they did a successful job with it, right? All right, let's listen to it now from Live Killers, Brighton Rock. And there it is, the Live Killers version of Brighton Rock, longest version of the song we have by far. Freddie's very playful in the beginning, obviously. He starts playing with the crowd. He's really in his element at this point in his career. Brian seems to be inspired by playing along just as inspired as Freddie is. Freddie's very strong in his low register, and I will say I like Roger's backing vocals in this mix more. They're mixed a little bit higher. They come through a little bit more clearly. It feels a little more intense, like the band's a little more driven in some of the instrumental sections. Even as Freddie throws in some more vocalizations here and there. Brian does lead the way. It slows down. He starts playing, expanding, and a bit outward. Then we have the middle section, of course, where Roger added a timpani solo at this part of the band's career, which is definitely unique to this version. I like it a lot. I actually like Roger playing the timpani. I love the sound of a timpani, so I mean that's just a personal preference myself. Brian's repeating section does come in. That's a bit more introspective sounding than any of the other versions. I feel a little more, I want to say quieter, but it's kind of like got this more. It's not as playful and more of this like somber exploration. I really do like it, though. It's actually a quieter version, but I really do like it. But it's not to mean it doesn't lose intensity, because it gets intense as we get closer to the end. A couple times the band will actually join in before we have the ending section with some nice rhythmic moments. A lot of playing between Brian, Roger, and John at this point while Freddie gets a rest off stage. Then it slows down a little bit for Brian to add some nice slow descending runs with the repeater again. And we break back into the band ending, the full band ending, for a great climactic finish. There you have it. It's about 12 minutes plus, and that is the last version we're going to be listening to. So let's break into our rankings of the Crown Jewels, figure out what the Crown Jewel is, and I'll give you my numerical rating and see if this one pops to the top 10. All right, we got 3 to rank because, like I said, we're throwing out the convention demo, so no Brighton fuck for you guys, or for us, rather. Let's go in from bottom to top. Number 3, we got the Hammersmith version. Great version. It is a little less pure with the son and daughter ending and not the great rock and roll ending we get. That's enough to throw it out of the top spot for me, enough to throw it out of the number 2 spot for me. So what becomes number 2 from there? Is it the Live Killers or the album version? This was actually tough. I think the album version has a sound that's hard to match, but the Live Killers version also has a lot more playfulness to it. The band was at a higher level at this point as far as touring goes. They really got to play with their audience, adding in the timpani, adding in Brian's quiet, introspective sounds, Freddie being at the top of his game, which is why I think I have to say the album version will be number 2, which means that Live Killers is the Crown Jewel version of Brighton Rock. That's the one we have. So that's where we're going to end that one. Brighton Rock, Crown Jewel, the Live Killers version. So that means it is now time to rank it numerically. Where do I rank Brighton Rock? From 1 to 11, as we always turned up to 11 here on PLD Projects. I'm going to give Brighton Rock a solid 10. Yes, a solid 10. It's one of my favorite songs from the album, and probably one of my favorite songs from the band's catalog career, to be honest with you. So where does that fit in my top 10 of all time? That's right, it's going to knock Going Back out of the top 10. It's going to slide the Fairyfellas Masterstroke down to 10, Father to Son down to 9, Ogre Battle down to 8, Liar down to 7, Great King Rat down to 6, My Very King down to 5, and Seven Seas of Rye down to 4, which means that Brighton Rock will slide into the number 3 spot for now with, again, a solid 10. And that will end it, folks, for this week's episode of Crown Jewels. Join us on patreon.com/PLD Projects, alongside such patrons as Danielle Ramirez, Brandon Buckingham, Brandy Parker, Jeff Alterman, John Lustrina, Kelly W., and all the rest of you. I could not do it without you. You really help keep the lights on. And join me on PLD Projects on the YouTube channel, as well as on all your Spotify feeds for other great shows, such as Two Mediocre White Dudes on Film, and also Class Action. Lots of fun to be had involving movies and music and more with PLD Projects. Until next time, though, I am your host, PLD. Keep rocking, and God save the Queen. Bye now.